Most families, after being struck by tragedy, find a way to stitch themselves back together, slowly, clumsily, but still holding on. The Mercer household did the opposite. It unraveled thread by thread until the home no longer felt like a home at all. When his wife died suddenly, millionaire Daniel Mercer was left standing in the wreckage of both grief and responsibility, raising 3 young sons on his own. Once gentle and lively, the boys turned wild with pain, their days filled with defiance instead of laughter. No nanny seemed capable of lasting more than a week, until Maya Carter arrived. She was 28, carrying her own quiet scars, and yet something about her presence was different. From the moment she crossed the threshold, the boys' chaos met an energy it hadn't before, calm, steady, and unyielding. It began on an ordinary Tuesday, though the scene in the Mercer Mansion's kitchen was anything but ordinary. Plates, bowls, and shards of glass lay scattered across the marble floor as if a parade had ended in disaster. A thick stream of pasta sauce clung to the walls, dripping down in red streaks that looked almost violent against the white cabinets. The kitchen island, usually the heart of family meals, had become a barricade behind which 3 8-year-old boys crouched: Noah, Caleb, and Oliver. Their faces were caught somewhere between triumph and panic, breaths heavy, hearts racing from the thrill of another mission accomplished. Another nanny defeated, another adult pushed to the edge, another victory in their private war. But this time, footsteps sounded in the hall, sharp and steady. The boys braced themselves, expecting shrieks, scolding, maybe the inevitable resignation followed by slamming doors. Instead, silence entered first. Maya Carter stepped into the doorway. She was tall, poised, her arms crossed over her chest. Her expression did not falter at the chaos before her. She did not gasp, did not widen her eyes, did not throw her hands to the heavens in despair. She simply stood there, calm as a statue, observing. For a fleeting moment, the boys wondered if she hadn't noticed the wreckage. But then she stepped inside, slow and deliberate, weaving through shards of porcelain without so much as a wince. She surveyed the mess and spoke just 2 words. "Clean it." Her voice was calm, so calm it unsettled them more than any scream could have. The triplets exchanged confused looks. Where was the outrage? Where was the lecture? Where was the storm they knew how to navigate? Caleb, always the first to speak, muttered under his breath, "It's not our job." His words, though defiant, lacked conviction. Maya didn't move. She didn't need to. Her gaze alone carried weight, sharp but steady, as if she had seen this dance before and knew exactly how it ended. "If you're old enough to destroy," she said evenly, "you're old enough to fix." Her tone never shifted. No begging, no bargaining, just unshakable certainty. The boys blinked. This wasn't the battle they had prepared for. Oliver tried to rally the old script. "You're the maid," he snapped. Maya's lips curved slightly, but it wasn't amusement. "Not today," she replied. Noah, the quietest of the 3, studied her with narrowed eyes as though she were a puzzle he needed to solve. There was no explosion of obedience, but something new stirred a small curiosity. Maya moved a chair aside and sat down right in the middle of the chaos, folding her hands as though presiding over a trial. "Gloves are under the sink, brooms in the pantry. Start with the large pieces. Don't cut yourselves. I won't be patching up heroes today." The boys hesitated, but one by one they moved. Caleb grabbed the gloves. Oliver fetched the broom. Noah lingered in silence until Maya's eyes found his. "You 2, she said, her tone lighter but firm. "Unless you prefer your brothers to do your work for you." Reluctantly he rose. The cleanup was clumsy, noisy, full of grumbles and muttered curses. At one point, Oliver nicked his thumb on a sharp edge and tears threatened to undo him. Maya did not rush over in panic. She simply handed him a bandage, waited for him to clean the cut himself, and then nodded. "You're fine." The words were plain, but her tone carried approval. As broken glass clinked into trash bags and sauce smears faded into damp rags, something subtle shifted. For the first time since their mother's death, the 3 brothers weren't fighting against someone. They were working beside one another, however awkwardly. When Oliver nearly dropped the trash bag, Caleb caught it without teasing. When Noah swept too quickly, Oliver corrected him quietly instead of mocking. And Maya, she simply watched, not intervening, not dictating. but present, anchoring the moment without needing to control it. That was when the sound of keys echoed at the front door. Daniel Mercer returned home, shoulders heavy with a familiar weight of exhaustion. Work had drained him, but home was harder than any office. He had stopped hoping things would improve. The house had become a place where broken things stayed broken. But as he stepped into the kitchen, he froze. His sons, the boys who had turned defiance into an art form, were kneeling on the floor cleaning. No shouting, no chaos, no tantrums. Just three small figures working together. And in the corner stood Maya, her arms still folded, her eyes calm. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he was hallucinating. But then Caleb looked up, met his father's gaze, and without mischief or shame nodded once before returning to scrubbing. Daniel could not speak. The silence pressed heavier than any scream, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something he had not seen in months: respect, peace. He turned slowly toward Maya. She met his gaze, unreadable. "They cleaned their own mess," she said simply. Daniel glanced at the spotless patches of marble, the brimming trash bags, the faded stains. "Why?" he asked, still baffled. Her reply was almost a shrug. "Because I asked them to." It was not philosophy, not strategy, just truth. For the first time in 6 months, something inside Daniel shifted. Not a shattering, but a thawing. And for the first time, he didn't feel entirely lost that night. The Mercer house felt different, though no one dared to name it. The air was not lighter. Grief still lingered in the corners, but there was a shift, small and fragile, like the first crack of dawn breaking a long night. After dinner, when the boys had retreated upstairs in their usual silence, Maya Carter remained in the kitchen. She pulled out 3 mugs, poured steaming cocoa into each, and piled marshmallows so high they threatened to spill over. She sprinkled a dash of cinnamon, a trick her grandmother had once sworn made the heart feel safe. Then she scribbled their names, Noah, Caleb, Oliver, on napkins, and placed a mug outside each of their bedroom doors. No speeches, no knocks, just a quiet offering. Daniel Mercer appeared at the end of the hall, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "They won't come out," he murmured. Maya glanced at him and nodded. "I know." Then she walked away. The hallway remained still. The mugs stood like tiny beacons. No footsteps creaked. No doors opened. Just silence. But when Daniel passed by at 3 in the morning, he stopped cold. All 3 mugs were gone. So were the napkins. No spills, no crumbs, nothing left behind except absence. He crouched down, touched the empty space, and something inside his chest tightened. He didn't say a word in the morning, and neither did Maya. But when she caught his eye over the sink, her calm expression told him everything. Healing, she seemed to say, didn't kick down doors. It waited until the locks turned from within. Later that day, while Daniel buried himself in paperwork in his office, Maya explored the house. A house this large carried more than dust. It carried ghosts. She climbed into the attic, a place more shrine than storage. Boxes of forgotten things stacked in silent towers. Finger paint drawings labeled Happy Mother's Day. A macaroni necklace tangled in string. Photo albums thick with dust. She opened a plastic container and froze at the sight of a small blue tablet. The screen lit instantly. No password required. She scrolled through photos, videos, even voice memos, snapshots of a life paused too suddenly. Then she found a playlist titled "Come Back, Mom." She pressed play. The piano-heavy melody filled the attic, soft and aching. Maya hugged her knees, pressing the tablet to her chest as the music echoed. She finally understood what no tantrum or broken dish could show. The boys weren't rebelling, they were defending themselves. Against hope. Against the risk of losing again. Hope meant pain, and pain was unbearable. That night at dinner, Maya didn't say much. She let the boys push food around on their plates, let Daniel eat in silence. She hummed softly as she cleared dishes. When bedtime came, Oliver lingered at the stairs. Opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then shut it again. Instead, he gave her a small nod. She returned it. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. Later, as Maya placed 3 more mugs of hot chocolate outside their doors, she didn't bother with cinnamon this time, just warmth. The next morning, she found all 3 mugs carefully returned at the top of the stairs, lined neatly side by side, handles facing the same direction. Not simply emptied, but returned. They drank it again. Daniel whispered from behind her, awe softening his voice. They returned it, Maya corrected, lifting the mugs gently. That detail mattered. It wasn't just about Coco, it was about reply. Trust, whispered in silence. For the first time in months, the Mercer home spoke not with words, not with laughter, but with small gestures that said, "We're still hurting, but we're listening." Daniel Mercer had become a ghost in his own house. Not the kind that slammed doors or moaned in the night, but the kind that hollowed out the air with silence. His office became his cave, his prison. He slept on the old leather couch, meals forgotten unless Maya placed a plate in his hands and walked away before he could refuse. The master bedroom stayed untouched, bed still dressed in the linens his wife had chosen, a shrine he couldn't bear to disturb. His sons hardly saw him. When they did, the encounters were brief and brittle. A nod, a shoulder squeeze, a glance that ended too quickly. Daniel was there in body, but absent in every way that mattered, Maya noticed. She had seen this kind of grief before, the quiet kind that folded inward until a person forgot how to breathe. She didn't judge, she recognized it. One afternoon, with the boys at school, she found herself standing outside his office. The light glowed beneath the door. Something told her to knock. No answer. She opened the door gently. Daniel sat at his desk, phone in hand, eyes locked on the screen. A faint sound drifted out, laughter, children's voices singing, a woman's giggle. The video shook as frosting-smeared faces laughed into the camera. A birthday party, his wife's birthday. Daniel's back was too straight, his shoulders rigid, like he was holding up a collapsing building. He didn't notice her at first. When he did, he shut off the video quickly. His eyes shimmered, though he didn't wipe them. His jaw was locked. "Sorry," he muttered. "I'm not the man I used to be." The words hung heavy in the air. Maya stepped inside but kept her distance. She respected boundaries, especially the kind people built to hold themselves together. "No need to apologize," she said softly. Daniel scoffed bitterly. "I do nothing. I see nothing. I don't even know what they eat anymore. I thought I could handle it all, grief, business, parenting, but every time I try, I make it worse." Her voice was steady, carrying weight without force. "Maybe you're not supposed to fix it. Maybe you're supposed to live through it with them." His head snapped toward her. This time he really looked, as though her words weren't comfort but a mirror. "I can't cry," he admitted, like confessing a crime. "I try, I want to, but nothing comes. Maybe crying isn't the only way to grieve," she answered. Then, after a pause, "Maybe you're still that man. You just forgot how to find him." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as though answers might be written there. Finally his voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "You don't know what I did the night she died." Maya didn't push. She waited. Silence, she knew, was sometimes the only invitation someone needed. "I was working," Daniel said finally, tapping the phone in his hand. "She wanted me home for dinner. I said I'd try, but I stayed late. There was a contract, a pitch, something that felt important. She took the boys out to get cake without me." On the way back, he swallowed hard, words dragging like chains. "If I had just come home, it still would have rained," Maya interrupted, calm but firm. "The other driver still would have run the red light." The universe doesn't trade tragedy for punctuality. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes burning. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to hate her for saying it. But he couldn't. Deep down, he knew she was right. She wasn't excusing him. She was naming the truth he had refused to face. Guilt doesn't raise the dead. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was still fragile. For once, Daniel didn't fill it with excuses or anger. He let it be. Before leaving, he whispered a question that cracked something inside him. "Do you think they hate me, your sons?" she asked. He nodded. Maya hesitated only a moment. "No, they miss you so loudly they don't know how to say it." Daniel closed his eyes, just for a second. But it was enough to break the pattern. Enough to let grief sit beside him instead of crushing him alone. When Maya closed the office door, she didn't feel like she was leaving a man sealed in grief anymore. She felt like maybe, just maybe, he had finally opened the door for it to come, and the house was too quiet when it happened. No screams, no loud footsteps, no warning. Just the sharp crack of something breaking upstairs, followed by a muffled thud. Maya had been wiping down the dining table when her chest tightened with instinct. She dropped the cloth and hurried up the stairs. The bathroom door wasn't closed all the way, and through the gap she saw Caleb crouched on the floor near the tub. His shoulders shook, his head hung low. Shards of a broken hairbrush were scattered across the tiles, and the mirror above the sink bore a new crack. Blood trickled from his palm. Maya didn't gasp or shout. She stepped in quietly, her voice soft but firm. Caleb didn't look up. She didn't push for answers. She simply knelt beside him, close enough for him to feel her presence, far enough not to overwhelm. She pulled a towel and a small bowl of water from under the sink, her movements steady and deliberate, as though tending to something sacred. When she gently took his trembling hand, he flinched but didn't pull away. The cut was small but deep enough to sting. She dipped the cloth into warm water, wiped away the blood and dust, and wrapped his hand with quiet reverence. "Does it hurt?" she asked, eyes still on his palm. His lip quivered. The words came out barely audible. "Everything hurts." The sentence hit her harder than any scream could have. His first real words to an adult in months. Her chest ached, but she swallowed it down and nodded. "Yeah, I know. No false comfort. No, it'll be okay. Just truth meeting truth." Finally, Caleb lifted his eyes. They were wide and stormy, filled with fear and shame. He whispered, "I didn't mean to break it." "The brush?" she asked. He nodded. Tears slipped down his cheeks. It was hers. Maya's heart squeezed, but she didn't let her grief show. She tied the bandage neatly and whispered, "I know it was. She used it every night," he said in a small voice. "When she sang to us. When she brushed my hair. I didn't want to forget." "Memories don't live in things," Maya said softly. "They live in you." For a moment he looked unconvinced, like he was afraid of losing even more if he let go. But then he leaned into her side just slightly, but enough to tell her he was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of holding it in. She let him lean, cradling his bandaged hand like it was the only thing that mattered. His breathing slowed, his body slumping against her shoulder. For the first time in weeks, Caleb looked like a boy again. Not a storm, not a threat. Just a child who missed his mother so much it ached in his bones. Maya didn't try to fill the silence. She knew now that silence was its own kind of language. She smoothed his curls gently, not to fix him, but to remind him he was safe, even at his worst. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him under. He fell asleep right there against her arm. Carefully, Maya lifted him and carried him to his bed. His fingers clung to her shirt for a second before loosening. She tucked him in, brushed a curl from his forehead, and sat quietly for a moment, listening to his steady breaths. It was fragile, temporary, but it was peace. She slipped into the laundry room, slid down against the dryer, and buried her face in her hands. Her tears came hot and unrelenting. Not for herself, but for Caleb, for the anger he had carried too long, and for the trust he had finally let slip. His words echoed in her chest like a brand. "Everything hurts." She knew those words would stay with her for the rest of her life. When her sobs finally quieted, she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and took a deep breath. There were still 2 other boys in the house. Each carried storms of their own. Tonight one storm had passed, and she had survived it with him. That had to mean something. Upstairs, behind a closed door, a boy who hadn't spoken in months was finally sleeping peacefully, his hand bandaged, his heart a little lighter. Maya hadn't meant to pry. She valued privacy, especially in a home where secrecy had become armor. But when she found Oliver's backpack slumped in the middle of the kitchen floor for the 3rd day in a row, crumbs and paper spilling out, she sighed and began to clean it. She expected the usual, a broken crayon, a folded math worksheet, maybe a crushed snack. What she didn't expect was the carefully folded note tucked deep in the back pocket. The kind of fold only small, nervous fingers made. Curiosity made her pause. She unfolded it gently. The shaky handwriting read, "If you don't leave by Friday, then I can trust you." That was all. No name, no greeting, just one fragile condition. Maya leaned against the cabinet, staring at the words. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a challenge. It was a child's hope thinly disguised as defiance. She folded it carefully back the same way she had found it and tucked it into her apron pocket, carrying it with her like something sacred. The note pulsed in her mind all week. Every time Oliver avoided her eyes, every time he passed silently in the hall, every time he sat at the table, picking at his food. He wasn't ignoring her. He was watching, waiting, testing. Friday wasn't just a day, it was a deadline. Maya didn't corner him with questions. She didn't smother him with forced kindness. She simply stayed. She showed up every morning, made breakfast, folded laundry, checked homework. Not loudly, not perfectly, just steadily. By Friday morning, she rose earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Daniel still asleep in his office. She decided on pancakes. Not the ordinary round ones, but the kind the boy's mother used to make on weekends. Dinosaurs, cut with cookie cutters still buried in the drawer. The kitchen filled with the scent of batter and syrup. She flipped long-necked creatures and stubby-tailed beasts, messy and imperfect, but full of intention. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, hesitant, small. Oliver appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, eyes clouded with sleep and doubt. He didn't speak, just watched her. She kept flipping pancakes, letting the silence stretch without fear of it breaking the moment. Finally, she placed a plate on the table. "Hungry?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, the same folded piece of paper. Only now, a second line had been added in the same trembling script. "You stayed." He placed it on the table, then bolted. Literally ran out of the room, as though lingering too long would undo the courage it had taken to write it. Maya stood frozen, spatula in hand, staring at the note. Her throat tightened instantly, tears burning at her eyes, not from sorrow but from something deeper, recognition. He hadn't needed to say thank you. Those two words were louder than gratitude. They were a fragile trust, handed over like glass, praying she wouldn't let it shatter. You stayed. She picked up the paper with trembling fingers, smoothing it carefully. She read it again and again, as though memorizing the handwriting itself. Her chest cracked open in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't about the note. It was about the faith behind it. In a world where everyone he trusted had left. His mother, a parade of nannies, even his father in his own distant way. Oliver had drawn a line in the sand and waited. And she had crossed it, not with speeches or promises, just by being there. She kissed the paper lightly, tucked it into the back of her journal, and returned to the stove. When she slid the last pancake onto the plate, the kitchen no longer felt empty. The silence wasn't absence anymore, it was earned. It was space carved out by something sacred. A boy's first step toward trust that afternoon, Daniel Mercer came home earlier than usual. Not because a meeting was canceled or work had slowed, but because something tugged at him, quiet but insistent. Go home. He parked the car, sat for a moment behind the wheel, staring at the mansion that no longer felt alive. For months, the house had been a shrine. Every creak of the floorboards carried memory, every shadow whispered loss. And his sons? He loved them more than life itself, but lately he hadn't known how to reach them. His guilt built a wall too thick to break, but the moment he stepped through the front door he froze. Laughter, not polite chuckles, not mocking giggles, real laughter, wild and unrestrained. 3 boys at once. Daniel moved cautiously down the hall, afraid even to breathe, as though sound might scare it away. When he turned into the living room, he stopped cold. The room was chaos, but a different kind of chaos. Pillow forts towered against couches, blankets draped like battle flags, cushions scattered across the floor, and in the center of it all was Maya Carter, her braids half undone, clutching a pillow like a shield. "Noah, you're going down," she shouted, tossing the pillow with perfect aim. Noah squealed, dove behind the couch, and launched one back. Oliver had crammed himself into a laundry basket, giggling uncontrollably. Caleb perched on a beanbag, brandishing a pillow like a knight's sword. "You'll never catch me," Oliver yelled. Maya leapt up, tagged him with a pillow, and he tumbled over in laughter. Daniel stood in the doorway, stunned. This wasn't the haunted silence he had come to expect. This was life. This was his children, not echoes of their mother, not shadows of grief, but present, messy, whole. Then Noah spotted him. "Dad," he cried, launching off the couch with reckless energy. Before Daniel could brace himself, his son barreled into his arms, knocking the air from his lungs. He stumbled back a step, arms wrapping instinctively around the boy. Noah was laughing, holding tight, not pulling away. Something cracked open in Daniel's chest, something that had been sealed for months. His lips curled into a smile. Not the polite, tight smile he offered at work. A real one, wide, unguarded. It felt foreign, almost strange, but right. Maya saw it. Maya saw it. She had ducked behind the love seat, pillow in hand, when her eyes lifted and found his. For a heartbeat, the room quieted, not in sound, but in feeling. She had seen him broken. She had seen him bitter. She had seen him hollow. She had seen him hollow. But this was the man who had once built blanket forts on rainy days. The man who once danced in the kitchen while pancakes burned. She didn't say a word. She just watched, reverent. Daniel lowered Noah, still chuckling, dazed by his own emotional whiplash. He didn't understand what had shifted. Maybe it was the laughter. Maybe it was seeing his kids not as ghosts but as themselves. Or maybe it was Maya, her ability to invite chaos without fear, to let joy breathe in a house that had forgotten how. He ran a hand through his hair, laughed again, freer this time. Pillows flew. Boys shouted about T-Rex attacks and couch kingdoms. Daniel stood in the middle of it all, and for the first time in months let himself feel something other than loss. Maya's eyes met his once more from behind the cushions. He didn't need words to know she understood. That smile wasn't just relief. It was declaration. Maybe I'm still here after all. The rain started sometime after midnight, gentle at first, then relentless, beating against the Mercer windows in waves. Maya Carter had just checked on the boys' 3 bodies tangled in blankets, finally sleeping soundly when she heard the faint creak of the back screen door. Curious and uneasy, she followed the sound. On the porch, soaked through as if he belonged to the storm, stood Daniel Mercer. His shirt clung to his skin, his hands hung limp by his sides, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. He didn't even flinch as the rain poured down. Drowning him in silence, it began with a fever. After dinner one evening, Noah grew unusually quiet. His eyelids drooped, his plate of food sat nearly untouched, and his small body leaned heavily against the back of his chair. By nightfall, his skin burned with heat. Daniel Mercer panicked. He fumbled with drawers, couldn't find the thermometer, didn't know what to do first. His hands trembled as he hovered near his son's bed, torn between calling the doctor and collapsing himself. Maya stepped in with quiet certainty. She guided Noah beneath the blankets, dimmed the lamp, and pressed a cool cloth against his forehead. She coaxed small sips of water past his lips and hummed a low melody that filled the silence with calm. Daniel stood in the doorway, helpless, watching her move with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Not just caring for illness, but carrying fear. It wasn't just Noah's fever she managed. It was Daniel's panic. Throughout the night, Maya stayed at his side. Every half hour, she refreshed the cloth, whispered soft stories, and rubbed gentle circles on his back until his trembling eased. She told him about a little bird who once got lost in a storm, but found its way home by listening to the wind instead of fighting it. At one point, Daniel tried to take over. "You should rest," he whispered, stepping into the room. Maya only shook her head. "He needs peace. I've got him." The way she said it calm, certain, almost like love disguised as instruction, made Daniel believe her instantly. As the hours passed, Noah stirred, eyes fluttering open. His forehead was still warm, but the fever had broken just enough to loosen his body. He blinked up at Maya, weary and clouded, and whispered one word. Mom. Maya froze. Her chest ached with the weight of it. But she leaned close, brushed his damp curls back, and whispered softly, "No, sweetheart, but I'm here." Noah's small hand reached out, curling around hers with surprising strength. He didn't ask again, he just sighed, clung tighter, and drifted back into sleep. What neither of them noticed was Daniel standing in the hall, half hidden by the doorframe. He had heard every word, and instead of piercing him with jealousy or pain, the word Mom filled him with something unexpected, gratitude. For months he had been afraid his sons would forget their mother. But in that moment, he realized remembering wasn't the problem. What they needed was space to remember, to miss, to heal. And Maya somehow had given them that. By dawn, the fever had broken completely. Noah woke groggy but hungry, which made Maya smile wider than any thermometer reading ever could. She scrambled eggs in the kitchen while humming under her breath. Oliver rubbed his eyes. Caleb clutched a stuffed dinosaur. And Noah, though slower than usual, shuffled to the table with color returning to his cheeks. They ate an unusual piece. Afterward, Caleb disappeared and returned with a folded piece of paper. He didn't speak. He just stuck it on the fridge with a magnet and ran off. Curious, Daniel stepped closer. The drawing was simple, drawn in crayon. 4 figures with wobbly outlines, 3 boys with spiky hair, a taller man with glasses, and beside him, a woman in a yellow dress holding all their hands. Above it, in careful block letters, were the words, "Our family." Daniel's throat tightened. He placed his hand against the fridge, staring at the childish scrawl. He didn't call Caleb back. He didn't make a speech. Instead, he looked across the room at Maya, who was rinsing plates at the sink. She met his eyes. She didn't speak either. She didn't need to. The boy had spoken for them all. Maya grabbed the towel and rushed outside. "Daniel," she called, her voice barely cutting through the storm. He didn't turn. His jaw was set, his eyes distant. Finally he spoke, voice rough, words sticking like glass in his throat. "I fought with her that night. Before she died, Maya stopped heart tightening. She said she needed space. She wanted to leave the house for a bit." His voice cracked. "I was angry. I said no." And then his breath caught, his chest heaving. And then she did. She left, and she never came back. His face collapsed then, not from the cold, but from the weight of 6 months of guilt pressing down like chain. Maya stepped closer, draped the towel over his shoulders, and cupped his face with steady hands, refusing to let him turn away. Rain streamed down both their cheeks, tears and storm indistinguishable. "Daniel," she said firmly, her tone sharp with truth, "you didn't kill her." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but she pulled his gaze back to hers. "You were angry. People fight. Words are said, and sometimes the universe is cruel. But you didn't kill her, and if you keep punishing yourself for one moment, you'll bury yourself beside her." His eyes widened, torn between disbelief and relief, as though she had finally named the monster that had been gnawing at him in the dark. "Do you hear me?" she pressed. "Softer now. You didn't kill her." Daniel didn't respond with words. He broke. His body collapsed against her, trembling as sobs tore free, raw, guttural, the kind no man should have to carry alone. Maya held him, anchoring him through the storm. She didn't shush him. She didn't offer cliches. She just stayed steady as the rain, catching every piece as he shattered. It was the first time he had let anyone hold him since the funeral. When the sobs finally eased into shudders, he pulled back slightly. His eyes were red, face streaked with tears and rain, but his breathing steadier. He looked at her not as an employee, not as a stranger, but as someone who had stepped into his hell and refused to flinch. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "Any time," she replied, meaning it. There were still wounds to face, secrets unspoken, questions unanswered. But this was a beginning. For the first time, he hadn't run from his pain. He had let it be seen. And under the relentless rain, Daniel Mercer no longer looked like a man lost at sea. He looked like someone who had finally admitted he wanted to find the shore it began with a fever. After dinner one evening, Noah grew unusually quiet. His eyelids drooped, his plate of food sat nearly untouched, and his small body leaned heavily against the back of his chair. By nightfall, his skin burned with heat. Daniel Mercer panicked. He fumbled with drawers, couldn't find the thermometer, didn't know what to do first. His hands trembled as he hovered near his son's bed, torn between calling the doctor and collapsing himself. Maya stepped in with quiet certainty. She guided Noah beneath the blankets, dimmed the lamp, and pressed a cool cloth against his forehead. She coaxed small sips of water past his lips and hummed a low melody that filled the silence with calm. Daniel stood in the doorway, helpless, watching her move with the confidence of someone who had done this before, not just caring for illness, but carrying fear. It wasn't just Noah's fever she managed. It was Daniel's panic. Throughout the night, Maya stayed at his side. Every half hour, she refreshed the cloth, whispered soft stories, and rubbed gentle circles on his back until his trembling eased. She told him about a little bird who once got lost in a storm, but found its way home by listening to the wind instead of fighting it. At one point, Daniel tried to take over. "You should rest," he whispered, stepping into the room. Maya only shook her head. "He needs peace. I've got him." The way she said it calm, certain, almost like love disguised as instruction, made Daniel believe her instantly. As the hours passed, Noah stirred, eyes fluttering open. His forehead was still warm, but the fever had broken just enough to loosen his body. He blinked up at Maya, weary and clouded, and whispered one word. "Mom." Maya froze. Her chest ached with the weight of it. But she leaned close, brushed his damp curls back, and whispered softly, "No, sweetheart, but I'm here." Noah's small hand reached out, curling around hers with surprising strength. He didn't ask again. He just sighed, clung tighter, and drifted back into sleep. What neither of them noticed was Daniel standing in the hall, half hidden by the door frame. He had heard every word, and instead of piercing him with jealousy or pain, the word "mom" filled him with something unexpected. Gratitude. For months, he had been afraid his sons would forget their mother. But in that moment, he realized remembering wasn't the problem. What they needed was space. Space to remember, to miss, to heal. And Maya, somehow, had given them that. By dawn, the fever had broken completely. Noah woke groggy but hungry, which made Maya smile wider than any thermometer reading ever could. She scrambled eggs in the kitchen while humming under her breath, and Daniel poured coffee silently beside her. He didn't know how to thank her. Words seemed too small. The boys trickled in one by one. Oliver rubbed his eyes. Caleb clutched a stuffed dinosaur. And Noah, though slower than usual, shuffled to the table with color returning to his cheeks. They ate an unusual piece. Afterward, Caleb disappeared and returned with a folded piece of paper. He didn't speak. He just stuck it on the fridge with a magnet and ran off. Curious, Daniel stepped closer. The drawing was simple, drawn in crayon. 4 figures with wobbly outlines. 3 boys with spiky hair, a taller man with glasses, and beside him, a woman in a yellow dress holding all their hands. Above it, in careful block letters, were the words, "Our family." Daniel's throat tightened. He placed his hand against the fridge, staring at the childish scrawl. He didn't call Caleb back. He didn't make a speech. Instead, he looked across the room at Maya, who was rinsing plates at the sink. She met his eyes. She didn't speak either. She didn't need to. The boy had spoken for them all. The Mercer mansion had long been filled with expensive things, paintings, marble counters, furniture polished so often it reflected light like glass. But none of it mattered. For months, the house had felt hollow, like a museum of grief. That began to change in small ways. One Saturday morning, Maya Carter decided the boys needed to breathe somewhere other than the walls that reminded them of loss. She loaded them into the family SUV, ignoring Daniel's raised eyebrows as she buckled Oliver into the back seat. "Where are you taking them?" he asked. "Out," she answered simply. "Out where?" "Out where walls can't follow." Daniel opened his mouth to argue but stopped. He saw the excitement sparking in Noah's eyes, the way Caleb tried to hide a grin, and Oliver bouncing with impatient energy. He only nodded. They ended up at the park, a sprawling stretch of green where the air smelled of cut grass and distant barbecues. The boys took off instantly, racing toward the jungle gym like they'd been starved of freedom. Maya sat on a bench, letting them play without interruption. She didn't hover, didn't call warnings. She let them climb too high, run too fast, scrape knees without panic. Daniel joined her after a while, hands shoved into his pockets. His eyes followed the boys, his jaw tight with nerves. "They're going to hurt themselves," he muttered. "They already have," Maya replied calmly. "Not from climbing, from silence." Her words settled heavy between them. Daniel sat down, shoulders slumping. For a moment they just watched. Noah pushed Oliver on the swing. Caleb hung upside down from the monkey bars, shrieking with laughter. "Do you ever think I've ruined them?" Daniel asked suddenly, his voice low. Maya turned her head toward him. "No, I think they're still here, and so are you. That means nothing's ruined. It just needs time," he scoffed softly. "You make it sound simple. It isn't simple. It's brutal. But brutal doesn't mean impossible." Her words were not honey. They were steel, and that was what Daniel needed. The boys returned breathless, cheeks flushed from running. Oliver thrust a dandelion into Maya's hand as if it were a treasure. She smiled and tucked it behind her ear, making him beam with pride. Noah sat heavily beside Daniel, panting. "Did you see me climb the rock wall?" Daniel hesitated, then smiled. "I did. You were faster than anyone else out there." The boy lit up. For a moment, Daniel realized something strange. He wasn't just proud. He was present. The guilt hadn't vanished, but it wasn't the only thing filling the space. Later that afternoon, back at the mansion, Maya found the three boys sprawled on the living room floor, building a tower of blocks so high it wobbled dangerously. She sank into the couch nearby, exhausted but content. Daniel appeared in the doorway, watching quietly. The scene was so simple, children stacking blocks, but it carried more weight than any contract he had ever signed. "You've changed everything," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Maya looked at him, tired but steady. "No, they changed everything. I just reminded them how." Their eyes met, holding for a long, unspoken moment. There was no romance in it, just recognition. Two people carrying different griefs but choosing somehow to stand in the same place. Then the tower collapsed with a crash, and three boys erupted in laughter. For the first time, the house didn't echo. It rang. The Mercer household began to shift in ways so small they almost went unnoticed. Breakfast no longer ended in silence. Instead, Oliver asked for extra syrup. Caleb teased Noah about how messy his hair looked. Daniel, instead of hiding behind his phone or rushing out the door, lingered long enough to drink a full cup of coffee at the table. Evenings transformed too. Instead of TV blaring in the background, there were board games, sloppy, chaotic, full of arguments about rules, but alive. Sometimes Daniel lost on purpose, letting Oliver gloat. Sometimes he won, and the boys shrieked that he had cheated, piling on him in a heap of laughter. For the first time since the funeral, the house sounded like a home. But healing never follows a straight line. It curves, dips, and tests the ground it stands on. The test came one Tuesday afternoon. Maya had just returned from picking the boys up from school when Oliver stormed past her, his backpack half unzipped, papers spilling out. He bolted up the stairs and slammed his bedroom door. Caleb and Noah hovered uncertainly in the entryway. Maya crouched. "What happened?" Noah bit his lip. Caleb blurted, "Some kids at school said we don't have a mom. Said that's why we're always weird." Maya's stomach dropped. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself, then stood. "Go wash up. I'll check on him." She climbed the stairs and knocked softly. No answer. She knocked again. "Go away." Oliver's voice cracked. Maya didn't leave. She sat on the floor outside the door, leaning against it. "You know," she said calmly, "I don't think those kids were right. You do have a mom. You'll always have her. She just can't sit at the table right now." Silence. "I miss mine too," Maya added quietly. "It doesn't stop just because people say it should." A beat of stillness. Then the door creaked open just enough for Oliver's red, tear-streaked face to peek out. His lower lip trembled. "She's not here," Maya's heart ached. She reached through the crack, holding out her hand. "Not here the way you want, but here in you. Every time you laugh, every time you draw, every time you love your brothers." Oliver hesitated, then his small hand slipped into hers. She squeezed it gently, not pulling him out, just holding. When Daniel came home that evening, he found all three boys piled together on the couch with Maya, a blanket wrapped around them. Oliver's head rested against her shoulder, his breathing even. Caleb clutched her sleeve as if afraid she might vanish. Noah's hand held tightly to hers. Daniel stood frozen, struck by the scene. It wasn't that Maya had replaced their mother. No one ever could. It was that she had given them permission to keep their mother alive in their hearts without drowning in grief. Later, when the boys were asleep, Daniel lingered in the kitchen doorway as Maya washed dishes. His voice was low, uncertain. "How do you know what to say?" She paused, hands still in the sink. "Because I needed someone to say it to me once, and no one did." Her words lingered in the quiet. Daniel wanted to ask more, but her posture warned him not to pry. Instead, he nodded, respecting the silence she chose. Autumn crept in slowly, draping the Mercer estate in red and gold. Leaves scattered across the long driveway, crunching beneath tires and sneakers alike. The chill in the air carried memories of pumpkin pies and Halloween costumes, memories that stung more than they comforted. For the boys, the season brought its own ache. Holidays had always been their mother's territory. She had filled the house with decorations, baked too many cookies, and stitched costumes by hand. Now, the thought of facing those traditions without her hung heavy in the air. Maya noticed the silence when the topic of Halloween came up at school, pickup. Other kids chattered excitedly about candy and costumes, but the Mercer boy stared out the car windows, lips tight. That night, she decided to act. The next afternoon, the boys walked into the living room to find a mountain of supplies. Scissors, glue, glitter, construction paper, paint, and even a tangled string of lights. "What's all this?" Caleb asked, suspicious. "Operation Spooktacular," Maya announced with mock seriousness. "Code name, Pumpkin Mayhem." Oliver giggled before he could stop himself. She laid down the rules. 1. No store-bought costumes. We make our own. 2. Glitter is a weapon. 3. The scariest laugh wins extra candy. For the first time in months, excitement sparked in the boys' eyes. They dove in, arguing over designs, competing over who could make the biggest mess. Maya guided but never controlled. She wore glitter on her cheek for the rest of the night and didn't bother to wipe it off. When Daniel returned home, the mansion looked like an art supply store had exploded. His jaw dropped at the sight of his sons running around in half-made costumes. Caleb wrapped in aluminum foil, Oliver with paper wings, Noah sporting a crown of leaves. "What on earth?" Daniel began. "Operation Spooktacular," Oliver interrupted proudly, striking a dramatic pose. Daniel looked at Maya. She shrugged, glitter clinging to her eyelashes. "Team effort," she said with a smile. Halloween night arrived, and for the first time since their mother's passing, the Mercer boys bounded out the door with excitement instead of dread. Daniel walked beside them as they trick-or-treated down the quiet neighborhood streets, listening to their laughter ring out into the cold night. At one point, Noah tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, can we do this every year?" Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. Maya followed behind, her arms loaded with spare bags for candy overflow. She watched the boys dash from house to house, shouting trick or treat with reckless joy. For once, grief didn't ride their backs like a shadow. When they returned home, the boys collapsed into a pile of costumes and candy wrappers, too tired to sort their loot. Maya tucked blankets around them where they lay on the rug, candy still clutched in small fists. Daniel lingered nearby, staring at the peaceful scene. His voice was quiet, meant only for Maya. "They look like kids again." "They are kids," she replied gently. "They just needed permission to be." Daniel swallowed hard, nodding slowly. He had forgotten that simple truth. And as he looked at her, surrounded by 3 sleeping boys and a trail of glitter, he realized she had brought more life back into the house than he thought possible. For the first time, he let himself wonder, what if she was meant to be here? Winter arrived like a thief, stealing daylight and wrapping the Mercer mansion in silence once more. The first snowfall blanketed the driveway, frosting the trees in white. Normally, the boys would have begged their mother for hot cocoa and sled rides, but now they watched the flakes in silence, faces pressed to the glass, too afraid to touch memories that felt fragile. Maya wasn't about to let winter turn into another season of loss. One Saturday morning, she bundled the boys into scarves, gloves, and boots. "Outside," she commanded, ignoring their groans. The moment they stepped into the yard, the cold slapped their cheeks. Oliver squealed first, launching himself into a snowbank. Caleb followed with a snowball aimed straight at Noah, who shrieked and retaliated. Within minutes, the front lawn transformed into a battlefield of laughter, flurries flying through the air. Daniel appeared at the doorway, coffee mug in hand, eyebrows raised. He hadn't been outside for winter play in years, not since his wife had orchestrated snowball wars and snowman contests. Watching his sons run wild with Maya made his chest ache in a way he couldn't name. "Are you joining or spectating?" Maya called, holding a perfectly packed snowball in her hand. Daniel smirked, shaking his head. "I don't think so." Her answer was to launch the snowball straight at him. It exploded against his coat, leaving him stunned. The boys roared with laughter. "You're in now," Oliver shouted. Reluctantly at first, Daniel stepped into the snow. Then another snowball hit him. Soon he was running, slipping, laughing, a sound that startled him as much as it delighted his sons. The yard echoed with joy until their cheeks were pink and their gloves soaked. They collapsed into the snow, breathless. Maya lay flat, making a snow angel with exaggerated flaps. Caleb copied her. Then Oliver, then Noah. Finally, Daniel gave in too, his frame larger but his movements just as childlike. They lay in a row, 5 figures etched in the snow, staring up at the pale sky. For a fleeting moment, there was no grief, just a family laughing with the clouds. Later, back inside, Maya draped blankets over the boys and set mugs of cocoa in their hands. The living room glowed with warmth, the fire crackling. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, damp hair still dripping from melted snow. "You make this look easy," he said quietly, glancing at her. Maya shook her head. "It isn't. It's heavy. Every smile costs something, but it's worth it." Her honesty caught him off guard. He studied her as she tucked the blanket more tightly around Oliver's shoulders. "Why do you do it?" he asked. She paused, her hand lingering in Oliver's hair. "Because someone once saved me the same way. And I owe it forward." Daniel didn't press. He could see the truth weighed on her, but also gave her strength. That night, when the boys finally fell asleep, Maya slipped outside to the porch. Snowflakes still drifted lazily, sparkling in the porch light. Daniel joined her quietly, hands stuffed into his pockets. "You've given them back their childhood," he said softly. Maya's breath puffed white into the cold. "No, they never lost it. It was just buried." Daniel nodded, staring at the snow-laden trees. Then he said something that surprised them both. "I don't think I could do this without you." Maya turned her head, meeting his eyes. For once, he wasn't hiding behind walls of guilt or distance. His voice carried raw sincerity. She didn't answer right away. She just let the snow fall between them, silent and steady, as if the universe itself approved of the fragile truth spoken aloud. Spring crept in with hesitant warmth, coaxing the Mercer estate back to life. Daffodils pushed through the soil near the garden beds, trees shivered with the promise of leaves, and the boys, restless from winter, rediscovered energy that seemed boundless. One Saturday morning, Maya declared war. Not the snowball kind this time, but a gardening war. She handed each boy a pair of gloves and pointed to the overgrown backyard. "Mission, Operation Jungle Rescue," she announced. "Objective, turn this wilderness into something our neighbors won't call the city about." The boys groaned, but curiosity tugged at them. Soon, Caleb was yanking weeds like they were enemy soldiers. Oliver dug holes with more enthusiasm than precision, and Noah carefully arranged flower pots as though the world depended on their order. Daniel watched from the porch at first, sipping his coffee. But as Maya wiped sweat from her brow and laughed at Oliver's lopsided hole, something stirred inside him. Without realizing, he set his mug down and joined them, grabbing a rake. The hours passed in a blur of dirt, laughter, and teamwork. For the first time, the backyard wasn't a reminder of what had been neglected. It was a canvas. By evening, the Mercers had built a crooked but colorful flower bed, planted vegetables that may or may not survive, and left behind muddy footprints that streaked the porch. The boys collapsed in the grass. Dirt streaked across their cheeks, grinning. Maya sat beside them, exhaustion pulling at her bones, but joy radiating from her chest. Daniel lingered near the fence, watching them all with quiet awe. When the boys ran inside for water, he stayed behind. His voice was soft, uncertain. "You've turned this house into a home again." Maya brushed soil from her hands. "No, they did that. I just refused to let the silence win." Daniel's eyes lingered on her, full of something he hadn't let himself feel in months, hope. He didn't speak it. He didn't have to. That night, the house smelled faintly of earth and new beginnings. For the first time, Daniel dreamed without nightmares. The cracks in healing always showed in unexpected places. One evening, Caleb refused to come down for dinner. His brothers picked at their food, restless without him. Daniel tried to insist, but Maya shook her head, excusing herself quietly. She found Caleb curled on his bed, knees tucked against his chest. The glow of a tablet screen lit his face. Maya sat gently on the edge of the bed, not asking permission, but not forcing herself either. "What are you watching?" she asked softly. Caleb's eyes shimmered. He turned the screen toward her. A video played, his mother singing softly while brushing his hair. Her voice filled the room, fragile and sweet, breaking Maya's heart in two. Caleb's lip trembled. "I keep playing it so I don't forget how she sounded." Maya swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him memory doesn't fade like that, but she knew grief didn't listen to logic. Instead, she said, "Do you want me to listen with you?" Caleb nodded. Together they sat in silence, letting the melody wash over them. When the video ended, Caleb leaned against her shoulder, whispering, "It hurts when it stops." Maya kissed the top of his head gently. "Then we'll play it again," and they did. Again and again, until Caleb's breathing slowed, and the weight on his chest eased just enough for sleep to find him. Later, Daniel found Maya in the hallway, her face pale but steady. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," she said. "I just sat with him." Daniel's voice cracked. "That's more than I've managed." Maya shook her head. "You're here. That's what matters." The truth settled between them. Healing wasn't about fixing. It was about staying. The first real family dinner happened almost by accident. Maya had cooked a simple meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and vegetables. She expected the usual: 3 boys eating quickly, Daniel retreating to his office afterward, silence filling the gaps. But that night, Oliver told a joke he had overheard at school. It wasn't particularly funny, but Caleb burst out laughing anyway, and soon Noah joined in. Maya chuckled softly, and Daniel, caught off guard, let out an actual laugh. It startled everyone into silence. The boys stared at him wide-eyed, then grinned. Caleb leaned forward. "Dad, do it again," Daniel blinked, confused. "Do what?" "Laugh," Oliver shouted. Daniel chuckled nervously, and the boys erupted in giggles. It spiraled into chaos. 3 boys trying to make their father laugh with ridiculous faces, silly voices, even mashed potato mustaches. Daniel laughed harder than he had in years, his sides aching, tears streaming down his cheeks. Maya watched quietly, her chest tight with a mixture of joy and ache. This was what she had wanted for them. Not perfection, not forced happiness, but real laughter. When the boys finally collapsed in a pile on the floor, Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhausted and glowing. His eyes found Maya's across the table. "Thank you," he mouthed. She only smiled, because no words could capture what the moment meant. Summer arrived, and with it came the kind of light that filled every corner of the house. The boys ran barefoot across the lawn, chasing sprinklers, eating popsicles until their lips turned bright red and purple. Maya sat on the porch, a book in her lap, though she hardly turned a page. She preferred watching them, their laughter a symphony that made the house feel alive again. Daniel joined her one evening, sitting closer than usual, their shoulders nearly touching. "Do you ever regret coming here?" he asked quietly. Maya thought for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done." But no, his gaze lingered on her, and for once it wasn't heavy with grief. It was curious, searching. The boys interrupted, of course dragging them into a water balloon fight that left everyone soaked and breathless. But when the sun dipped and the sky blazed orange, Daniel looked at his sons, at Maya, and realized he hadn't thought of his house as a prison in weeks. It was a home again. The first anniversary of their mother's passing loomed heavy. The boys grew restless, their moods unpredictable. Daniel retreated into himself, afraid to face the day. Maya felt the tension thick in the air. When the morning came, she gathered them all in the living room. On the coffee table sat a box of photos, markers, and blank paper. "Today isn't about pretending it didn't happen," she said gently. "It's about remembering." At first, the boys resisted. Caleb frowned, Oliver pouted, Noah sat stiff and silent. But when Maya pulled out the first photo of their mother baking cookies with flour dusting her cheeks, they leaned closer. One by one, they added their memories. She burned the first batch. She let us eat the dough. She danced while stirring. The stories tumbled out, laughter and tears mixing freely. Daniel, hesitant at first, finally spoke too. "She always said I was hopeless in the kitchen. She wasn't wrong." They laughed together even through tears. By the end of the day, the blank paper was covered with drawings, words, and colors. An imperfect but beautiful scrapbook of love. Daniel closed the box gently, tears streaming down his face. For the first time, grief didn't feel like drowning. It felt like remembering together. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Grief never truly ended. Some days were heavy, some nights were restless. But the Mercer house no longer echoed with silence. It breathed again. Daniel began tucking his sons into bed each night, even if only for a few minutes. Caleb started talking more. Oliver trusted more freely, and Noah smiled more often. Maya stayed steady as ever, carrying her own ghosts but helping them all bear theirs. One evening as the sun dipped low, Daniel stood at the porch with her. The boys played in the yard, their laughter carried by the wind. He turned to Maya, voice low but clear. "You didn't just save them," he said. "You saved me." Maya didn't answer right away. She only watched the boys, her eyes soft. Finally she whispered, "We saved each other." And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, grief, and love, the Mercer family, broken but healing, finally felt whole again.